want to talk about Chauncey Billups, who you covered in your time in Detroit in the 2000s, winning multiple championships there. Just one of the most unlikely finals teams ever. One of the great upsets, probably right up there with the Mavericks over the Heat in terms of them beating the Lakers and him becoming a legend who's probably going to go into the Hall of Fame one day. Started his career with the Celtics. Great point guard, one of the great point guards we've seen. And I love these anecdotes that you hear about, and I'm sure you're going to share a couple here as well. The one Bill Simmons and Ryan Russillo tossed out there about him playing for a team late in his career, the coach just saying, oh, do whatever on the inbounds, and Chauncey just stopping the play and, being adamant that we're going to set something up here in this inbounds late in the game. We're not just going to do whatever. I've heard a bunch of anecdotes of just his X's and O's mind and his cerebral approach to the game in terms of thinking like a coach, and now has stepped into the coaching field in LA this year out there with Cassell and under Ty Lue. Is making a run at it, has been on TV, has done a million things that would project well here, and has that recognizability factor, I'm sure, the players on this team who grew up watching him. Probably everybody's favorite in terms of the resume here. How would you evaluate him as a candidate?
Well, I think Chauncey is going to make that short list. I mean, whatever that list is going to be, they're going to have competition for him, though. In fact, I would say that of all the candidates that the Celtics are going to interview, the stiffest competition to get Chauncey will be Portland. I think he's one of the few candidates that's going to have, I think, multiple teams that will do more than just interview him, but they will offer him the job. So if he's the guy that the Celtics are seriously thinking about, they're going to have to be very aggressive in their pursuit of him and make him an offer sooner rather than later. I know Rip Hamilton, his former teammate, former UConn star, TMZ caught up with him, and Rip made it very clear that Chauncey is very interested in that Portland job. And as someone who has worked with those guys in the past, I know they're close. I know they talk. They are as close as two NBA players I've ever been around to being brothers could be. They just have that connection. So I definitely take Rip for his word. But the thing about Chauncey and the leadership, because you touched on it a minute ago, Bobby, he has a way of being a calming presence at all times. He's one of those few guys that rarely gets rattled, and he figured out early on how to make everyone understand that they have a role, and it's an important role for us to win. For example, Ben Wallace, who everyone, when they think about Ben Wallace when he played for Detroit, great rebounder, elite defender, that's who he is. Chauncey recognized that Ben wanted to touch the ball a little bit more on offense. And so there must have been I can't remember at what point in the season it happened, but it got to the point where their first possession, they always threw it to Ben. And it didn't matter whether he scored or not. More times than not, he didn't. But it was Chauncey's way of saying, big fella, we need you to defend and rebound, but we're going to see if we can get you going on offense first. And they did this all the time. And I thought that for Ben Wallace, that was one of those bonding moments where your leader is making sure that he's being inclusive to what your needs are and what you want. And in return, you need to give us what we need to win. And it's little things like that Chauncey consistently did throughout his career. He always played the game like a coach. And, shout out to Larry Brown, who probably did more for Chauncey in terms of thinking like a coach than any other coach that Chauncey was around. I just remember there were many days where Chauncey was ready to wring Larry Brown's neck because Larry was just being constantly changing up what he needed Chauncey to do. And it just got to the point where Chauncey finally understood it wasn't to just throw him off rhythm. It was for him to think, to be a thinker out there. And it got to the point where Larry just kind of let him go and didn't have to really navigate that and shift him in that direction. And again, Chauncey, he's one of the great thinkers. Now, obviously, Chauncey is not perfect. There are certainly elements in his past that are not pretty. And to some extent, he's going to be held accountable for those. And he's going to have to probably address those at some point. But the overall body of work as a player, as a leader. I think he's won like the Joe Dumars Award for citizenship. Basically, it's the good guy award in the NBA. He's won it a couple of times when he played. Uh, there's so much, there's so many receipts that I think are favorable for him. That while there are some things that aren't pretty and they should be addressed, I don't think they're going to necessarily outweigh or mask over a lot of the positive things that he's done, both as a player and in his career after playing.
So it's kind of this new reckoning that we're having here in terms of sexual assault and that whole conversation coming up with his past. It's always worthy of bringing up and raising and questioning past indiscretions here, even though it happened. If we're talking 1997, that was the year before I was born. So 24 years just about now ago, when he was a rookie with the Celtics. Essentially sued, along with Ron Mercer, the fellow rookie there, his first season in the NBA, of rape. And the case ended in a settlement. You can find the case online. You can read just some damning and shocking allegations against him and Mercer as well, and Antoine Walker. It happening at Antoine Walker's house, the victim going to the hospital. Details I'm not necessarily going to get into here that we don't have to dive too deep on, but shocking allegations against Billups that ultimately ended up in a settlement. It's always tough. So when I was covering Syracuse basketball, there was a player on the team who someone reached out to me. This was probably my, one of my years covering the team there. And there was an allegation of sexual assault. So it's tough as a media. You can't just come out there and say, he's been accused of sexual assault, blah, 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 and make that kind of accusation. You kind of need something to go off there. So, I go through the documents, I go through the school, I go through all these different things and try to find, paperwork here, something you can go off, something you can bring up in terms of reporting here. And there was nothing. And, the victim didn't really want to bring it to the forefront. So I really had no basis to bring it up when it came to this player. So this is always a difficult thing you have to grapple with here. Someone's innocence versus someone's, credible accusations. You're always going to try to believe the victim and not doubt them and those kind of things. And I think that's what's good here is that we've shifted back towards really grilling the victim and, trying to make them come up with perfect accusations and proof and all this kind of stuff toward, grilling the possible perpetrator a little bit here. So I don't know how much Billups has addressed this in his past. Obviously, he's been able to go on to have a career there and do TV and now become an assistant through all this. But at the same time, I think our society's generally been willing to forgive alleged perpetrators and, not so much grill not so much air with the victims here. And, we haven't heard from the victim, still anonymous, and it was so long ago and all these different things. But I do think it's a positive sign that you do have people in both Portland and Boston, despite his immense credentials here and what he would bring being substantial to these organizations, people saying that this guy has this thing in his past. I'm not crazy about it when there's other qualified candidates here. Maybe you go with someone who doesn't have that kind of baggage. But I do think it's so good that we're having this conversation so much later and not just saying like we probably were in the past. It was a long time ago. Let's just move on.
Right, right, and that's important. Not only because of just where we are as a society, but there has to be a level of transparency with these type of hires, and that's part of his narrative, right? Right or wrong, good or bad, it's there. It's part of it. I mean, there was court filings related to this that involved him, and I'd be curious to just see how he handles those type of questions because I don't while I don't necessarily think it should be the dominant theme of his candidacy, it should not be ignored. And that to me is again, there's a balance between those two things, but I don't think it's all that out of the realm of reality to find that balance between acknowledging this happening, having him address it in some capacity, and then being able to move on. Because obviously, this we're talking about. I think it was 1997 when his rookie year when it happened. I think the settlement was like 3 years later, and so from 2000 to 2021 of 20 plus years, there hasn't been anything even remotely close to that particular incident in his background. And so that, again, you don't ignore the incident, but if you're going to at least shine somewhat of a light on it, make sure that you shine a light on just all the time that has passed since then to see if there are any other, times when that became an issue, which, as far as I know, there haven't been. So.
Hi guys, Cedric Maxwell here. I want to take a minute to tell you about Marigold Medical. I'm used to keeping my body in great shape, but with arthritis, even the most simple everyday tasks became unbearable. As soon as I called Marigold Medical, I knew I was in good hands. No drugs, no surgery, just an experienced team of caring professionals that wanted to get me back to doing the things I love. Make the call to Marigold Medical and get back to pain-free life.